Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Pehei. So the Mishnah taught us that within this small tract of land, the small patch, which is all of 6 tefachim length by 6 tefachim width, we can actually plant into it no less than 5 species of seeds, of vegetables. Let's take a look perhaps at the diagram again, featured in Rashi on Daf Pedal Amid Beis. So here we see this patch, this garden patch, which is 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim, and we have 5 different varieties planted into it. So 4 will be planted alongside the rim, the perimeter of this patch. So we have one type for each side of the patch. Now they go from end to end except for the actual corners, which are left fallow. And then we have the 5th variety planted right smack in the middle of this patch. The Mishnah brought a pasuk, which is the source for this concept of planting so many varieties, so many species in this patch, in this small tract of land, provided that we have the proper separation between the different varieties. That leads us to step number 2. The Chachamim need to determine for us exactly what type of separation is required in this case in order to avoid Issa Kalayim. So the pasuk tells us that 5 varieties may be planted within close proximity to each other. Now in the pasuk we don't see an indication of the exact size of this patch, how large it should be. The Chacham determined for us, yes, even in this small tract of 6 by 6, a small aruga, sheishisha al shisha tefachim, we can plant into it 5 different varieties, because as the Chacham told us, in this case we can avoid kilayim. How are we going to address kilayim? So as Rashi explained, that regarding the varieties planted alongside the perimeter, there's no concern whatsoever, since they are perpendicular to each other. They're placed at a right angle, so there's no concern there. We have one type sitting on one side of the aruga, the other one next to it at a right angle, and so on and so forth. In this case, they look separate and distinct, and there's no concern. The Chacham determined for us that the middle one, the 5th species sitting right in the middle, there is a concern because it's parallel to the other types, and therefore we need to be marchik. We need to distance it. We need to separate it with a shiur yenika. This is a shiur of 3 tefachim, which will ensure that the sustenance, the nourishment of this species in the middle there will be separate from the source of nourishment of the ones all around it. So the shiur yenika is 3 tefachim, 1.5 tefach per plant, for a total of 3. So therefore we place the middle one at a distance of 3 tefachim from the sides, which will guarantee that the yenika, the nourishment, will be drawn from a different tract of land than the other minim, the other types, thereby creating that separateness which avoids the Isser Kalayim. So once again we have a aruga, a patch, 6 by 6 tefachim. One may plant in there 5 different varieties, 4 all along the perimeters, and 1 in the middle, which is separated with a shiur yenika. Let's take a look at the Gemara. On Daf Pehei Amid Aleph, on the 2nd line. Says the Gemara, the Chachamim determined for us what exactly is this shiur, this amount needed to separate the sources of nourishment. Umi nolan, how do we know? The kimlu rabbanon. This that was determined by the rabbanon. The chamisha beshita, that 5 varieties within this small patch of 6 tefachim is okay, because he's going to distance the middle one from the sides with the proper amount of distancing the shiur yenika. How do we know that is milsei? That is something that can be determined. How do we know that the Chachamim, how do we know that a human being can be familiar, can be knowledgeable with this type of knowledge of the goings on within the earth below, of the nourishment and sustenance of plants, in order to determine the shiurim of yenika? Is there such a thing that a person is familiar with this knowledge? Says more, yes. Amar Rav Chia Ba'aba Amar Rav Yochanan. My dechsiv. What does the following pasuk mean? Lo yisasig gvul re'echa. So you're not meant to interfere to breach the boundary, gvul re'acha asher gavlu rishonim, that the early ones set forth and determined. Says the Gemara, gvul shegavlu rishonim lo yisasik. You're not meant to interfere, to breach, to trespass the gvul, the boundaries, the borders that were set down by the earlier ones. Explains Rashi. The early ones here is referring to those who were expert in the science of horticulture, of agriculture, of botany, who knew exactly the goings-on of these nourishments and sustenance of the various plants, and they were expert in this field. And when a person has his neighbor nearby, he must be careful. Don't interfere, don't breach his boundary, don't interfere with his tract of land, in his field, in his garden. Meaning, be careful. Make sure that when you plant something at the edge of your property, that it won't have a detrimental effect on your neighbor's property. As discussed in Maseches Bava Basra, one's meant to distance his planting, his trees from his neighbor's property, a proper amount of distancing, a proper harchaka, in order to avoid damaging his property. So that requires knowledge of this form of information, of the unique potential, the nourishing and the sustenance, and how trees and plants work. So that's what the pasuk is telling us. Be careful. Gvul shegavlu rishonim, the rules, the boundaries determined by the early generations who were expert in this field. Lo yisasek, don't breach. Follow the rules, follow instructions, follow the halachas that require you to be careful and not to interfere and to harm your friend's property. So Rashi explains that a person should again not plant his tree right next to the border in a manner which it will loosen, it will weaken his friend's property. So this is dependent on this knowledge of botany and agriculture. So therefore, we see from here, the pasuk is telling us that there were those who were expert in this field. So who are those people, says the Gemara? Who's the Rishonim who studied, who investigated these matters and were knowledgeable in these subjects? My Gavlu Rishonim, who the earlier people mentioned here? Omar Shmuel Nachmeni, Omar Vienes. The Chsiv, as it says in the pasuk, Eile b'nei hachayri, these are Eile b'nei Seir hachayri, yoshvei haaretz. So the pasuk describes these b'nei of Seir hachayri as yoshvei haaretz, dwellers of the earth. Now it doesn't say which land, Eretz Canaan or Eretz Plishtim. So Mashal explains, apparently the pasuk here is referring to something else. Yoshvei haaretz, dwellers of the earth. Says the Gemara, what do you mean by dwellers of the earth? As opposed to what? Atu kuli alma, yoshvi rekia ninu. Is this in contrast to everybody else who are dwellers of the heavens? What do you mean yoshvi haaretz? Says the Gemara, no, it's not contrasting to the others who are yoshvi rekia ninu. No, ella shoyu bekiin biyeshuva shel eretz. What the pasuk means to say is that these fellows were very intimately involved in the yeshuva shel eretz. They were very knowledgeable about the nature of the earth and how to properly cultivate and inhabit it. They would say, well, this reed's length. So this is the way they would measure the fields using a kana, a reed, a stick. So they would say this measurement, this tract of land, maloi kana zeh lezayis. So the length of this kana, of this reed, is suitable for planting an olive tree. So we're expert in this agriculture and the science behind the planting and the horticulture. They would say maloi kana zeh likfanim. This area is suitable for vineyards. And maloi kana zeh te'enim. This one is for figs. V'chayri. What does it mean? B'nei seir ha'chayri. So the Gemara makes a drasha. Shemarichem es haaretz. Chayri can be switched around to merichem of reach. They would merely take a sniff at the land, at the earth, and they would already know the exact nature of this piece of land, what it was suitable for. V'chivi, what is that referring to? Amar of Papa shoyu toyamin es haaretz kechivya. So the pasuk there discusses the bnei seir ha'chayri yesh haaretz, And there's actually mention in another pasuk of chivi. This too is related to this concept. The chivi is like the snake. A chivi is a snake. So they would just taste they would take a little taste of the earth. Toyim in a sa'aretz, like a snake. As Rashi says, the snake is ma'acholei afar. He feeds off the earth. So they were like the snakes. They would take a little taste, a little sample, and they would determine the nature and the quality of this particular tract of land. So we see that these people were expert in this knowledge, in the science of unika, of sustenance, of nourishment, of plants, of trees, etc. And indeed, they studied it, and it became widely known, and became disseminated. And indeed, we see that this type of information can be known to us humans, and based on this type of information, the Chachamim determined for us the halachos of kalayim, the proper halachos of distancing, of separating different types of plants, which are dependent on this concept of unika, of nourishment and sustenance. Gemara continues, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Amar, he has a little different drasha from the word chayri. Chayri shenasu b'nei chayri minichseim, that these people, the Bnei Serach Chayri, became bereft of their, free of their nechasim, of their properties. They were overtaken by others. Okay, continues the Gemara. Let's get back to a halacha of the aruga of this patch, which is 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim. Amar Abasi, aruga toichavav, its interior needs to have an area of 6 by 6 tfachim. Chutz migbolel. This is in addition, aside from its boundaries, its borders. So they would fashion a border around the patch for as a walkway to water the patch. So Ravasi tells us that you must know this halacha of the aruga is 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim aside from the area of the walkway. Why? Very simple. Because as mentioned earlier, we need to have an achaka of a shiur nika between the variety, the type planted right in the middle, to the borders, to the ones planted alongside the perimeters. We need a shiur of 3 tfachim. Says Ravasi, if so, we must make sure the patch contains 6 tfachim in addition to the border. You can't include the border, which is left fallow and empty and unplanted. You can't reckon that as part of your aruga, which will only leave you with an aruga of, well, if you take off a tefach on each side for the walkway, you only have 4 by 4 tfachim, which is not sufficient space to plant 5 varieties. You will not have the proper achaka. So once again, we need 6 by 6 aside from the walkway which is around it. Tani nami hachi, the Brisa will tell us a similar concept, will support this halacha. Tani nami hachi, aruga toicha shisha. The aruga has an interior of 6, and this indeed is in accordance with Ravasi. Says Gemara gvulel bekama. Now we discussed the gvul, the boundary, which was formed around this aruga. So what size, what dimension does the gvul need to have? So Rashi says this pertains to some halacha, that we're going to discuss later, a leniency applied to an aruga. And the aruga in that case needs to have the proper format of aruga, needs to have the interior, a proper walkway. So regarding that halacha, the Gemara wants to know, how exactly is he going to form the gvul? How wide must it be? Taisus learns a bit different. He says the nafkamina is for mekach hamemka, for business. So if one sells his friend a aruga and the walkway with it, so how much does he need to provide? How wide is the how legally wide does the walkway need to be? Continues the Gemara. How wide? Kedisnan, as we learned a similar concept in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, roichav, the width, kimaloi roichav parsa, is the width equivalent to the width of a parsa, of a leg, of one's foot. The Gemara soon will tell us it's a roichav tefach. So Taisus actually points out that this Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda saying kimaloi roichav parsa is actually pertaining to another halacha, not exactly the walkway around the patch. It pertains to a halacha of making a hefsek in a field. Nevertheless, the Gemara applies that concept to here as well. If we find that a shiur of a roichav parsa, width of a tefach, is regarded as a makam hefsek, it is a significant space which can separate 2 things. So the Gemara here will apply to the walkway. Apparently, it is sufficient to be regarded as a walkway. Omar Rav Zera, v'itemer Rav Chanina bar Papa. My time with Rav Yehuda. What is the source basis for Rav Yehuda? And as we applied Rav Yehuda's shita to the walkway as well, how do we know that the walkway is going to be a tefach wide? Dichsiv, as it says, v'yishkisa b'raglcha. You will water with your feet, kigana yorak, as a vegetable patch. So why does the pasuk need to mention the foot? Well, it's pretty obvious. If you walk over to your vegetable garden to water it, it's going to be by foot. In those days they didn't have tractors. So what's the point of a raglacha? Says the Gemara, we learn from here, ma regel tefach, just as one's foot is wide at tefach, af gvul nami tefach, the gvul, the walkway, which is meant for the watering of the patch, will have a width of a tefach. So all around the patch, we have this walkway, which is a tefach wide, which is meant for being mashka, for watering this plant. So once again, we learned that this aruga will contain 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim within the interior area of this aruga, and this is in addition to a gvul, to a border surrounding it. And as Rashi points out, this will be considered a bona fide aruga pertaining to an halacha found later in the Gemara. And the Gemara tells us that what is the proper shiur of the gvul, a tefach wide, as we find the concept mentioned in the pasuk that the hashkoya, the watering of the vegetables, will take place b'raglcha. We learn at drasha it will be done along a walkway, which is a tefach wide. Continues the Gemara. Omar Rav, aruga bechurva shaninu. This patch, this aruga, mentioned in our Mishnah, which allows one to plant 5 varieties inside the small area, is limited to an aruga bechurva, which is not surrounded by neighboring arugas, by adjacent patches of vegetables. It needs to be empty all around. Why? Because let's remember, this aruga was filled all along its perimeter with plants, alongside its ruach. Each perimeter, each rim has its own specific species. So when we have a row going from end to end on this aruga, and he will place another aruga alongside this, we will have a problem of confusion. We will have 2 rows running parallel to each other with only a minimal harchaka, separation between them. How much is going to be separating them? It's going to be actually 2 tfachim, because the border, the walkway of this aruga, which is left unplanted, next to the walkway of the second aruga, which is left without any plants, it's fallow, it's left empty. In this case, we have 2 walkways. Each one is a tefach wide, as we mentioned earlier. So we have at most an empty space of 2 tefachim wide between these 2 rows which are running parallel to each other. Now we know that rows that run parallel to each other are considered to be kalayim. There's no heker, there's no distinction, there's no separateness here. And therefore, we need a proper archaka. We need 3 tfachim, which is a shiur unika. Therefore, Rav says, one cannot place a aruga, a patch, with the vegetables running alongside its rim, right next to the other patch. That will be a problem of kalayim. So therefore, the halach in the Mishnah is specific to a case of a aruga, of a patch, which has nothing around it. Says the Gemara, one second. Let's figure out a way, a formula, where we can fashion the plants, pattern them in a manner which is acceptable. What about the corners? What does the Gemara mean? So the aruga mentioned in our Mishnah has the plants running alongside its perimeter, but, as Rashi mentioned in the Mishnah, he needs to leave the actual corners fallow. So the corners were left empty, but otherwise the entire sides were filled. Says the Gemara, why don't we figure out another pattern to allow many patches alongside each other? What about the corners? Meaning, instead of going from side to side with a row of vegetables, limit the row, shorten it. Begin from the actual corner. Plant and plant partially up the ruach alongside the perimeter, but stop at a certain point. At a bit less than halfway, at the halfway point. Now move over to the next patch, to the next aruga alongside it. Go ahead and begin a row, starting from the other side, from the other corner. Come down towards this row. So both rows are running in the same direction, but they're not parallel to each other. They stop short of each other. There's a distance of 3 tfachim from each other. So this is a wonderful pattern which will allow many arugos to be planted next to each other. Let's stagger the rows and allow many adjacent arugos alongside each other. So once again, instead of planting the entire perimeter, let's do partial rows which will not end up being parallel to each other, and we'll actually have our achaka of 3 tfachim. So between the 2 halves which are running in the same direction, there will be a distance of 3 tfachim, and between the half and the row which is running alongside the bottom of the aruga, of the adjacent aruga alongside it, there's not such a big concern because they are not running in the same direction, they are perpendicular to each other. In that case, a minimal hachaka is sufficient. We don't need the 3 tfachim. Says the Gemara, so what's the concern of Rav? Why does he limit the halacha of aruga to a single solitary, lonely patch? Why can't he make many patches and stagger the rows and avoid kilayim? Says the Gemara, Amri be'Rav mishmei Rav. So the Chacham in the Beis Medrash Rav said in the name of Rav, the problem is b'mamale es akronis, because we're speaking about a patch which indeed the perimeter was filled with plants. He didn't stagger them. He filled them entirely with plants, and therefore he can't bring another patch adjacent to it. Says the Gemara, so why does he do so? Wouldn't it be better, wouldn't it be preferred for him to plant outside, meaning to add other patches alongside it? And don't fill up the interior one, meaning why go ahead to get yourself into trouble? Plant from side to side alongside its full perimeter, and therefore preclude and not enable him to have more additional patches alongside it. Rather than do that, let him limit his planting to a partial row, and thereby enabling him to plant outside as well, to add adjacent patches. Says the Gemara, Gzeira shemiyamales akronis. There's a concern. If we allow this, perhaps he's not going to follow instructions. Inadvertently, he's going to fill up the entire perimeter with a row of seeds, a row of vegetables. In this case, certainly it would be a problem of kilayim if one was to add another patch adjacent to it. Says the Ramban, why is there concern specifically here? More than the typical halacha mentioned in our Mishnah of this patch, where the Chacham allowed him to plant 5 species, provided he does it in the proper format, the proper configuration. Why there is there no gzera that he won't do it properly? Says the Ramban, this is different because perhaps he's going to plant 1 patch today, and he's going to do it in the way which he's accustomed to, which is from side to side, alongside its perimeter. Tomorrow he's going to decide to add another aruga next to it, without realizing, hey, I didn't stagger the row in the first aruga. So here indeed there's a concern of exera, that he might run into kilayim by having a perimeter filled with vegetables alongside an adjacent aruga, and he'll have parallel rows without the proper achak. Says the Gemara, even so, what is the concern? Since they are separate, distinct entity, each patch is considered to be an independent planting area. Why don't we just regard it as the same halacha of Rosh Tur? Now, Rosh Tur means if it's a field which comes to a point, comes to a sort of a triangle. In that case, the Mishnah tells us that even if it protrudes into another field, it's mutter, because it's clearly visible that this protrusion belongs to the outside field. It doesn't look confused, doesn't look like they're intermingling. They look like 2 separate, distinct fields, and it's mutter. Says the Gemara, perhaps we should apply that concept to arugis as well. So even, yes, he'll fill the perimeters with plants. He'll have an aruga which is fully planted alongside the rim and the edges. He's going to have another aruga nearby. Says the Gemara, that's okay, because each patch has its own distinct identity. It's viewed as an independent planting station. It's a patch with a gvul. It looks separate. It looks distinct. So what's the problem? Says the Gemara, "V'lo yehi el rosh tur." Let it be like a rosh tur. Milay Tanan, haven't we learned? Haya Roish Tur means a head of a cow, which is narrow and which is wide and narrows in the front. This is like a triangle. So Roish Tur is referring to the Tzura, the form of a triangle, as Rashi has a picture here, diagram of a triangle. So if we have Haya Roish Tur, Yerek, if he has a Roish Tur, a triangle of a vegetable field patch, Nichnas Aseich Sadeh. So this vegetable field is coming to a point and it's protruding into his field. There's no concern. Haya Roish Tur Yerek Nichnas Aseich Sadeh Acher Mutar Mipnei Shenireh Seif Sadeyu, because it's obvious, it's visible that this is coming from a Sadeh Yerek. It belongs to the vegetable field. It doesn't look like it's being mixed up with the other Sadeh. So here as well says the Gemara, each aruga, each patch is distinct, it's separate. So why is there concern here? Says the Gemara, Ein Roish Tur Baruga. This concept will not apply to aruga. Yes, if it's connected to a field, if there's a protrusion into a field, yes, then it looks separate. But when we have two arugais, which are very small patches, they're not so significant, such significant planting areas, the concept of Roish Tur will not apply here. They look mixed up, they look intermingled, there's confusion going on here. Therefore, Rav maintains, if he should plant the entire perimeter with plants, with vegetables, so he has a patch which is fully planted, one cannot plant another patch nearby, because these two patches are mixed, are confused, they appear like a line. Let's take a look at Rashi, who gives us the background of the halacha of Roish Tur. This is Rashi at the third line here from the top. V'lo yeheh l'Roish Tur. This is going back to the Gemara's kasha. Why can't we apply the halacha of Roish Tur? Koloimar afilu milei oisoi. Even if you propose, you're concerned that he will inadvertently fill up the perimeters with plants. And then he plants in the adjacent patch. And there's no adequate separation between both patches. Why is this a concern? We should merely treat it like the tip of the yerek, of the vegetables, hanimshach uba misadazu, which is coming along from one field, lisadazu, protruding straight into the other field. Shenira yafe she'ene mizu shenichnas la. It's very obvious that this protrusion doesn't belong to the field which it entered into. It's pretty obvious that it's an extension of the other field. And it's pretty obvious, it's pretty visible. In that case, as we discussed earlier, when there's heker, when it's visibly separate, when they're considered to be independent entities, we're not concerned about the fact that they're jointly drawing unique sustenance from the same patch of land. There's no concern. As long as they look separate, they look distinct and independent. Continues Rashi, Roish Tur Korile. It's called Roish Tur Levishaken Derech L'Seif Hasoda Lies Miskar Tzeres Harisha. So we call it a Roish Tur, a triangle, because this was customary for the farmers. They would have the furrows at the edge of the field, narrowed as it went along up until a tip. So this was the term used for one field which is protruding to the other, a term called Roish Tur, because this was customary, so standard to close off to end the field in this manner in a tip form. Okay, so this was the Gemara's kasha, that why can't we apply this concept to the aruga shel yerek, to our patch? Each patch is separate, is distinct. It should have the same status of the Roish Tur. Says the Gemara, Ein Roish Tur ba'aruga. Says Rashi, Ein Toras heter Roish Tur. This Toras heter, this concept of Roish Tur, will not apply aruga from one aruga to the other. Ella, rather, misadel gdoila sech aruga. It only applies to a Roish Tur coming from a large field protruding into a patch. Or alternatively, a protrusion from a patch into a large field. Or alternatively, from one large field into the other. Because they are considered to be significant planting areas. And therefore, they have their independent entities, independent identities. And therefore, even if there's some slight protrusion and confusion, they look separate, they look distinct, and there's no kalayim. Avol, however, in our case, shtei arugos lo yahav heker. When we have two patches next to each other, lo yahav heker, there's no distinction. Ela doime kile and achas. They appear like one continuous planting area. The lo chashiva kol chada ba'alpi nafsha, because each one doesn't have significance. It's not prominent on its own right. It's a small patch, and therefore we cannot apply that concept here. And therefore, the Gemara explains the basis of Rav's concern. Rav doesn't allow patches to be placed next to each other for concern that he might fill the entire perimeter with plants, not stagger the rows properly, in which case there won't be a proper separation between the arugos, and it will appear like one continuous patch, one continuous planting area, which is kalayim. So this is the shita of Rav, who does not allow an aruga to be placed adjacent to others. Ushmuel Amar, Shmuel disagrees. Aruga bein haruga sheninu. When we learned in our Mishnah that one may fill a patch which is 6 by 6 tefachim with 5 varieties, we are speaking even if this patch is surrounded by others. That too is acceptable. Now the Gemara at this point figured we're speaking about a patch which was filled from side to side, meaning planted all along the perimeters. Says the Gemara, how can that be? How can one place one patch which has a row of vegetables alongside its perimeter, alongside its rim, right next to an adjacent patch which contains the same feature? These rows are parallel to each other. They don't look distinct. They're not perpendicular to each other. They're parallel. They're running along the same direction. In this case, it is not sufficient the fact that we have merely a harchaka, a space of 2 tefachim, meaning those 2 borders, those empty borders, because each patch has an empty walkway around it, which is wide a tefach. So each patch will have an empty walkway of a tefach wide. So we have a total of 2 walkways adjacent to each other, which provides us a hachaka, a space of 2 tefachim between the patches. That's not sufficient, because these 2 rows of vegetables growing alongside the perimeters of both adjacent patches are running parallel to each other. They don't look distinct and separate. In this case, we need 3 tefachim of hachaka. Says the Gemara, V'hakamisari ba'adadi. They're intermingling. Rashi says the leaves intermingle. They look confused. They look mixed up. We need 3 tefachim. Says the Gemara, of course. B'noita shur lekan, v'shur lekan. What Shmuel meant to say was, he's going to pull one row in this direction, and the other row, the row of the adjacent patch, in the opposite direction. He's going to stagger those rows. He's going to arrange them in a pattern, as we mentioned earlier, which does not have a concern of kalayim, since indeed there is a harchaka of 3 tefachim. So in summary, we learned regarding the aruga, which has a space of 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim. Gemara told us that a proper aruga is meant to have a walkway, a gvuli border, which is wide tefach. Shmuel says this aruga is speaking even when it is bein ha'arugos. It is amongst other patches. As the Gemara told us, he staggers the rows in a manner which is no kilayim. Rav is concerned. Rav says no. We're concerned that perhaps he's going to plant his patches in a manner which he's accustomed to fill up the perimeters. He won't stagger them properly. And therefore Rav says the only time the aruga is mutter, if it is bechurva, it is present in a fallow area, not surrounded by other patches. Otherwise, his exera, he might fill the perimeters and not provide adequate distancing and spacing between the adjacent patches. Continues the Gemara. Amarula, Bo b'marava. So in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, they asked the following question regarding this aruga, this shishal shisha that has 5 varieties. Hifkia telem echad al pnei kula mau. If one, hifkia literally means to rip, so he dug a furrow all along the aruga from one side to the other. So he has this patch with 4 varieties alongside the perimeters, 1 for each direction. And for instance, instead of putting the small plant smack in the middle, he decided to make this long furrow running from one side of the aruga to the other, and that's where he placed the 5th variety. Perhaps it's fair to say that he crowded the patch too much. He overdid it, and it's usher. On the other hand, we can say this furrow is regarded as a separate space, separate area. It does not create additional confusion here, and therefore it's mutter. So this was their question. If one dug this furrow throughout the entire patch. What is the halach? Omer Rav Sheshes, but irvuv ubital sashura. This confusion, this over confusion, over intermingling, he overdid it. This irvuv came ubital sashura. It annulled the process, the order. Shura is the order, the system, the pattern, which is meant to be in place. He ruined the thing, and it's asur. Rav Asi Omer, Ein iruvi ma'avatal sashura. This additional feature here does not annul, does not destroy the shura, this order, the pattern, the system of the aruga. It's still mutter. Eisvi Ravina Rav Ashi. So some actually had a girsa of Rav Ashi Omar, Ein iruvi matzal shura. So Rav Ashi was the one that was matter, and now Ravina challenged Rav Ashi. How could you say that this one row running across this patch is okay? We have a Mishnah which says as follows: Hanatea shtei shurei shel kishuin. So if one has a field and he plants 2 rows of kishun, of cucumbers, alongside shtei shurei shel dluim, 2 rows of pumpkins, alongside shtei shurei shel pula mitzri, 2 rows of these beans, mutter, that's okay, because each type, each variety is discerned, it's discernible, it's distinguished, it's independent, it's unique, it's distinct, and therefore there's no need for harchaka, for distancing. This is not regarded as kalaim. So you can have these rows alongside each other without any problem. Continues the Mishnah. Shura achas shel kishun. What about only 1 row of cucumbers placed alongside 1 row of shura shel diluim, of these pumpkins, placed alongside the shura achas shel pula mitzri? In this case, it's asur, because a single row is not distinct enough, it's not chashav enough, it's not significant enough, and creates irrev and confusion. Here too, in our case of this patch, she has a single row running through the middle of the patch. It creates confusion. It's kalayim. Says the Gemara, Shani Hacha, or some have the Gersh Shani Hasam. It is different over there in the Mishnah. The Ika Saracha. Rashi says these the vines. So these plants have extensive vines and perhaps maybe some leaf. They get overgrown. They grow large, and therefore it creates confusion. It creates irvuv, intermingling of the vines, of the leaves, and therefore, in that case specifically, regarding those plants, there's a concern of kalayim. However, in our case, he's planting an ordinary vegetable. There's no concern. So, in summary, what about if one he draws a telem? He digs this furrow throughout the entire patch, and that's where he places the 5th species. Rav Sheshes says it's asur, because a single row creates irv of confusion, and it's not regarded as a separate entity. It combines with the other species and creates confusion and kalayim. Rav Ashi says it's mutter. The telem echad, this 1 row described in the Mishnah there, which creates kalayim, that's only when it comes to these types of varieties which create confusion on account of their excessive zmoiros, their vines, their shoots, and they make irvuv. But in our case, an ordinary typical plant, a vegetable, won't do that, and therefore it is mutter in this patch. Continues the Gemara, Rav Kahana, Rav Yochanan. Here we have another example of an aruga which is mutter. Haroitze lamalis kol ginasa yark. If one wants to fill, he wishes to plant his entire garden. He wants to fill it with vegetables, and he can't do so using the formula mentioned now Mishnah, this patch of 6 by 6. In that case, he can only plant alongside the rim, the perimeter. He needs to put the 5th one in the middle with a proper distancing, proper spacing between the middle species and the ones on the side, as we mentioned earlier. So this leaves a lot of empty space, a lot of wasted area. Says Rav Yochanan, if one wishes to make good use of his garden, wants to fill up his entire garden, how can he do so? Of course, we're speaking about planting many varieties, many species. So what is the pattern, what is the formula which he can use? Again, Amar Rav Kahana Rav Yochanan, Haroitze lamal is kol ginasa yarak, oise aruga shisha al shisha. So he fashions this patch of 6 by 6 tefachim. Okay, so far so good. V'oigel b'chamisha, and he fashions in this patch a circle of a diameter which has a diameter of 5 tefachim. So within this 6 by 6 square, he puts a circle of 5 in diameter, and leaves leaves the empty space on the right and the left of this circle. We'll get to that soon, what he's going to do with that space. But in any case, we have a little space on the side of the circle, which is a half a tefach on each side, because the width of the patch was 6. The circle only has the diameter of 5. So he has a little bit on each side. So Rashi learns that he will fill up, he would plant inside that half tefach as well, which is a square surrounding that circle. He will place other varieties there. Actually, it sounds from Rashi that he will place separate minim, various species in that square, one type per direction. So this is in addition to the planting inside the circle, and he's essentially filling up the entire patch. And by placing many adjacent patches next to each other in this manner, he's actually filling up almost his entire field with vegetables. So why is this allowed? Because Rashi explains a circle and a square are very distinct. So the circle looks like a separate planting area, the square around it looks separate. So you can go apply this formula throughout his entire garden, fill up his entire garden. Says the Gemara, Va'ika de beini beini. Now, what about the walkway that he's filling up? You're telling me he can place one variety inside the circle, another one in the square, and we imply that perhaps he's going to fill up the entire walkway as well. In this case, it's certainly kalayim, because everything is connected, everything is confused, everything is mixed up, all the different varieties are mixing up with each other. Why is that allowed? Amr Deravyana, you're right. He's not going to fill up the walkway, that he's going to leave empty. But Machr Ben Abenayim, the space in between the patches, the walkways, will be left fallow. Rav Ashi Amar, no, he can fill them with plantation. Imahoyu Zurin Shesi, Zoran Erev. He needs to merely manipulate the plants and have them face different directions. Meaning that the planting inside the patch, for instance inside the circle, will go in one direction, and the ones in the borders will go in a different direction. So this way they look separate, they look distinct. Rav Ashi Amar Imahoyu Zurin Shesi, Zoran Erev. So if the vegetables planted in this patch, in the circle, in the square, will be planted, Shesi means vertical, Zoran Erev, then he will plant the walkway horizontal. Erev, if the patch is being planted in the Erev direction, in the horizontal direction, Zoran Shesi, so he plants the border area, Shesi, in the other direction, going vertically. So since they're going in different directions, that is a distinct hecker that calls attention to their separateness, and they don't look like they're one and the same continuous planting area. So once again, Rav Yechana tells us that if a farmer wishes to fill almost his entire vegetable garden with plants, he can do so by fashioning these circular patches which contain a square around them, and this way he can plant with very little concern. And as the Gemara told us that the walkways do pose a problem, so we have two shittas. One shitta says he leaves them fallow. The other shitta says he can fill them up as well, but he plants them in a different direction than the planting within the patch itself. So the point here is that a patch which is circular is also considered to be a distinct entity. It's considered to be a separate planting area. Therefore, we don't view these patches, these many adjacent patches, as connected and intermingled. They're considered to be separate entities and do not pose a concern of kalayim. Says the Gemara, how can you say that a patch fashioned in a circular manner is regarded as a patch? Avoidas yorek b'yorek. The Brisa tells us that avoidas yerek b'yorek, if we have one vegetable near the other, what is the proper amount of space needed to separate them? Now the term avoida here is referring to the space needed for the farmer to cultivate his vegetable. This is a term used in Maseches Kalayim. Sometimes the distance required is connected to the space needed for the farmer to do his work. So this is a term which is applied to the space which is required between the different plants. Avodas yerek v'yerek acher. What is the space requirement? The harchaka between one vegetable and the other. Shisha tefachim. So this is referring to the 6 tefachim, this patch which is 6 by 6, which can contain 5 species of vegetables. The Brisa says, "V'roin oisam ke'tavel merubas." We look at them as a square board, a square tavla, a tray, and therefore it's mutter. Apparently, a patch needs to be square. Only in that case is it regarded as a separate, distinct entity. If they're circles, they all look mixed up, intermingled, and they don't have their own heker, they don't have their own identity, they're not distinct. So how can you say that one can fill his whole garden with patches which consist of circles? Says the Merketavo de Shari, only if it is square like a board it is mutter. Otherwise it's asr. Says the Gemara, no. Really? Even a round patch has a din of an arug of a patch. Hasam, that brisa which limits the aruga to a square patch, hasam la'akula b'kula achrina, that is pertaining to applying another leniency to that aruga, lahate reishtur hayotz mimenu. There's a halacha of reishtur mentioned earlier, so if this aruga comes to a point and is protruding into another field, it will be mutter because it looks like a distinct planting area. It looks like the protrusion is part of the aruga. But that is limited to a square aruga. Only in a square aruga will we say that a protrusion is connected to the aruga. But a round aruga, that is not chashav enough, that is not distinct enough, and therefore if the rosh tur will come from the round aruga into a sada, that will not be allowed. However, with regard to our case of planting throughout his garden by fashioning these round arugos, yes, we regard them as each one as a distinct planting area. There's no confusion, there's no taroives, there's no kalayim. So in summary, if one wishes to fill a very large space of his property with yarak, the Gemara tells us he forms a patch which is 6 by 6 tfachim. He fashions an eagle, a circle within it, which has a diameter of 5. He fills up the circle with one variety. He fashions a square around that circle with a different variety. What about the border area, the walkways? One shita says he leaves them fallow. The other shita says the borders are meant to be filled with plants as well, but they should be facing in a different direction than the planting within the patch itself. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. We began with the halacha of aruga once again of 6 by 6 tfachim, which has 5 varieties. 4 are planted alongside the perimeters. 1 is placed in the middle, at a distance of 3 tfachim from the sides. The Gemara tells us that is the Shiur Yanika, to separate the source of sustenance, so that they don't draw from the same piece of tract of earth. It separates their Yanika, and indeed the Chachamim were very well versed in the knowledge required to determine the various shiurim of Yanika. The Gemara continued with Rav, who told us that this halacha of aruga is limited to a single patch. One may not surround this patch with other adjacent patches. Why? Because if the plants are running alongside the perimeter, so we'll have 2 adjacent patches with 2 rows which are parallel to each other. They don't look separate and distinct. They need a harchaka of 3 tfachim. 2 adjacent patches don't have that harchaka, because we said a patch has a walkway which is a tefach wide. So this leaves us with 2 walkways adjacent with only 2 tfachim of harchaka of separation. Therefore that's not sufficient. Why the kash on that? Why can't he stagger the rows in a manner which will provide adequate separation of 3 tfachim? Says the Gemara, there's a concern. Rav is concerned that he won't do so. Perhaps he'll do the planting in the way which he is accustomed to doing. He'll plant all alongside the rim, and doing so would pose a problem for the aruga adjacent. Shmuel says there's no concern. One may plant many patches near each other, simply stagger the rows properly. We continue the halacha of creating this furrow throughout the patch. According to Rav Sheshes, it's asr because it creates confusion. According to Rav Ashi, it's mutter in this case. And finally, we discussed an option of filling up almost his entire gina with yarak by creating many patches, which are 6 by 6, which consist of a large circle in the middle of a diameter of 5 tfachim. He fills that with one variety. He surrounds that with a square of a different variety, and this way he can line up many patches alongside each other without any concern of kilayim.